smallpox, malaria, measles, those sorts of things have been massively reduced. On average, for almost all of human history, a man and a woman were only survived into adulthood by 2 of their children. And basically, that's why the world's population didn't increase.
Extending life by controlling disease is perhaps one of the greatest achievements of humanity.
I was born in a world of 2.5 billion, and I'm seeing it almost triple in my lifetime. And life has not gotten worse. In fact, for most of the population of the world, life has gotten better in these 50 years.
Living healthily and long has consequences. Population growth.
By and large, the planet has provided for the human race so far. As the population has increased, people, through agriculture and industry, have exploited those resources ever more effectively. But increasingly, we're seeing signs of strain. We're reaching the limits of our environment, perhaps most alarmingly with that fundamental ingredient for life, water.
We call our Earth the blue planet because about 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water. But most of that is sea. Just 2.5% is fresh water. And of that tiny fraction, just 1% is available for human use. The rest is locked up in mountain glaciers and the Earth's polar ice caps. But there's another fact we need to understand about water.
Well, there's no more water on the planet than there was when life first appeared on Earth. It changes its distribution. There's more water in different parts of the world than there were hundreds or thousands of years ago, but it's still exactly the same amount of water that's been here always.
We appropriate over half of all the available fresh water in the world to serve our needs, to transform deserts into fields, to generate energy from rivers, and to build cities in some of the most arid regions on the planet. But despite our ingenuity, there are many who struggle to get enough of this basic resource.
More than 1 billion people on the planet already lack access to safe, clean drinking water. And we know things are going to get more difficult as the population continues to grow. Within the next 20 years, as much as half of the world's population will live in areas of water stress.
Chronic water shortages are often the result of poor infrastructure, politics, poverty, or simply living in an arid part of the world. But increasingly, the pressures of population are to blame. Mexico City is ranked as the 8th richest city in the world, ahead of Moscow, Hong Kong, and Washington, D.C. It also benefits from heavy annual rainfall. But its water system is buckling under the pressure of supplying water to its 20 million inhabitants. And every day, at least 1 million people are affected by the shortages. Enrique Vasquez is a water truck driver for the government. And the number of people relying on this emergency service is growing daily. Today, he's heading for a poor district in the city's southwest, where he's a regular visitor.
Nombre sea de Dios, todo salga bien. Más tarde, hacia el futuro, la guerra va a ser por el agua, ya no por el petróleo. Pero no entendemos, la gente no entendemos que en lugar de cuidar el agua, la desperdiciamos.
The problem is a combination of leaks in the system and backup reservoirs that are running dry. The city authorities predict that these reservoirs may be completely emptied within a matter of months.
Pero mire, ya se acabó. Y cae bien poquito. ¿Lo puedes abrir para que nos muestre? Sí, está abierto, mire. Ya se acabó.
The people living here have had to adapt their lifestyles to an erratic water supply.
Nosotros nos bañamos con medio, lo que es la mitad de este bote. Mi baño, pues ahora sí que para entrar a orinar tienen que orinar 2, 3 personas para poderle echar una cubeta o media cubeta.
Desgraciadamente, la falta de agua, la necesidad de agua, la carestía de agua que va a haber es en todo el mundo. No nada más es aquí en la Ciudad de México. Yo quisiera que toda la gente recapacitara, la poca gente que tiene un poco de agua que la cuidara, que la conserváramos. Porque llegado el momento nadie va a tener agua, nadie va a tener agua. Y eso es a nivel mundial.
In Mexico City, shops which sell water to meet people's daily needs are becoming ever more common. But the water we use at home is only a fraction of the water we actually consume. And that's because we use colossal quantities in industry and agriculture.
We may know where the water out of our tap comes from, but we very seldom know where the water that went into our can of cola or into the shirt that we're wearing on our back, where those goods were produced and how much water it required, and what the consequences were for the natural systems in those areas and for the local communities that are dependent upon that same water. So for example, the cup of coffee that you may have in the morning requires on the order of 120 liters just to produce the coffee and bring it to your table. A can of beer, 150 liters. A hamburger, 8,000 liters of water. To produce enough water to grow the cotton in my shirt is 3,000 liters as well.
The impact of human demands on the world's freshwater systems are so massive, they can be seen from space. The Aral Sea, a freshwater lake in Central Asia, once covered 65,000 square kilometers. In the last 40 years, it has lost 90% of its water. The rivers that feed it diverted to irrigate cotton. Lake Chad, on the southern edge of the Sahara, has also been drained to 1/10 of its former size by drought and overuse, yet 30 million people depend on it.
With groundwater levels declining across the world, from North Africa to China, pollution of rivers and wetlands on the increase, and already today more than 1.2 billion people living with water scarcity, our prospects for providing water to nearly 3 billion more people do not look good. But in many ways, supplying water to people is the least of our worries. As we've seen, the lion's share of the water we use goes into agriculture, and that means any water shortages we face in the future will affect our ability to provide that other staple of life, food.
When it comes to the world's food supply, some of the most accurate information comes from space. Geographer Molly Brown monitors food production on Earth using data from NASA's satellites.
This is a ecosystem in Thailand where they do rice agriculture, and it's extraordinarily productive and in one of the most highly productive agricultural regions.
Now she's beginning to see global agriculture hit a natural limit.
One of the things that all these different landscapes really show us is how we are using almost all the land that's available to us that's really highly productive, that has great agricultural potential. And so that we know that there isn't a lot of extra land. I mean, we are using 30 or 40% of the entire land surface. As the world's population increases, the urgency with which we're going to have to increase the amount of food we produce will increase. And so we need to double the amount of food that we have available to us as soon as possible. How we're going to do that is through raising productivity, because there's really no more land with which to expand to.
A doubling of productivity sounds ambitious, but we've done even better than that in the past. In the 20th century, the industrialized nations managed to triple their farming yields, with the invention of synthetic fertilizers, and then by the introduction of mechanized processes. The less developed parts of the world continued using traditional farming methods into the 1960s until an Iowan farmer decided to do something about it. Norman Borlaug, who died this year aged 95, is credited with saving millions of lives in what's become known as the Green Revolution.
So he was a very unpretentious man, and you can see from his office, small but very functional, and he had some of his awards on the wall, but also in particular, I always thought this picture which he kept on the wall was quite typical of the kind of person he was, his interactions with the next generation of scientists around the world, and his enthusiasm for getting out into the field and showing people what could be done with the science in improving agricultural productivity.
Borlaug developed high-yielding, disease-resistant crops and taught Indian and Mexican farmers how to get the most out of them with modern farming methods. The astonishing 5-fold increases in yield that they achieved allowed many countries to become self-sufficient in food. In 1970, Borlaug received the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in alleviating world hunger.
He was able to get his wheat, his new varieties, delivered to India, and within a few years, it was really astounding. He showed me pictures of the mounds of wheat, the surplus that had been produced within a few years of introducing these new varieties. And in fact, that's the seminal event. That's the Green Revolution.
Thanks in part to Borlaug, much of the world is now fed. But globally, we're beginning to see a levelling off of agricultural yields. This is leading to a worrying new trend. To maintain their own food supplies, some of the richest and most powerful countries in the world are acquiring large tracts of land from some of the very poorest. Olivier de Scoota is a human rights lawyer who's been monitoring these land deals for the United Nations.
Arable land suitable for cultivation is becoming a scarce commodity, and countries find it more and more difficult to produce enough food to feed the population. So they are now scrambling in a global competition to achieve food security by buying land abroad.
International corporations and increasingly governments are leasing some of the last remaining areas of undeveloped farmland in the world. Their aim is to introduce intensive farming methods and export the food back to their home countries.
Well, the problem is that in most cases, these deals are not sufficiently well monitored. They are not transparent, and we are not certain that local communities will benefit from these investments.
These deals are often controversial and shrouded in secrecy. But according to local media reports, Chinese investors are negotiating land deals throughout Africa, as well as with Kazakhstan, Mexico and Brazil. Saudi Arabian firms have leased farmland in Sudan, and several British investment funds are reported to be raising capital to buy farmland in Angola, Malawi and Ukraine. Most of the target countries for foreign investors are in Africa, some of which already struggle to feed their own people.
Well, we see paradoxical situations such as foreign investors producing food in Ethiopia, shipping this food back to the home country or selling it on the international markets, when Ethiopia is still a country which is heavily